Good morning.
Good morning.
Unitarian Universalist congregations affirm and promote 7 principles, which we hold as strong values and moral guides. We live out these principles within a living tradition of wisdom and spirituality, drawn from sources as diverse as science, poetry, scripture, and personal experience. Now, there are 7 of them, but I'd like to share the second principle. It is justice, equality, and compassion in human relations. Hello, and thank you again for giving me the opportunity to be your guest Reverend this morning. We've heard so much about compassion this month, our theme for December, especially in the wonderful sermon last week by Reverend Kathy and Karen Armstrong's 12 Steps to Compassion. I hope I can add something useful to you today on how compassion can help direct our lives for a better tomorrow. Well, speaking of a better tomorrow, who remembers the famous Carousel Progress at Disneyland? Anybody remember that? Anybody back in the day? They were a show that showed how inventions through the years were helping mankind to a better future. And I was a young boy at the time and loved going there. The robots there were audio animatronic robots would sing, "There's a great big beautiful tomorrow shining at the end of every day. There's a great big beautiful tomorrow, and tomorrow's just a dream away." Well, I went there many times back in the early 1970s. It was one of the few rides that didn't take a D or an E ticket. And being free, I loved going to that attraction. And you're probably wondering what compassion has to do with Disneyland. Well, it's really about my mother. She showed compassion to me in a special way. It was the early 1970s. I was living in Anaheim, California, about 3 miles from Disneyland. And I was into science like nobody's business. I could not get enough of science, especially when Tomorrowland would show all of the wonderful exhibits there. And I thought all the problems of humanity would be solved by science, and that we'd be flying around in atomic cars in 1980 that would float 3 feet off the ground and go 200 miles an hour. I really thank my mother because she gave a serious sense of compassion to me when I begged her to please go and learn more about science, and she'd give me $10 and let me run amok in the park. I was only 11 at the time, but back in the day you could do that sort of thing. Let somebody run loose there for several hours. By the way, in 1972, it cost about $2.50 to get into Disneyland. Well, it's about $15 in today's money. Compassion, for me, was all about how scientists, and I could help make the world a better place, and thus more people would be happy. People would be helping each other into a wonderful world, understanding more about each other, and creating our dreams for the future. Abraham Lincoln was even down there on Main Street, USA. Well, not the real Abraham Lincoln, but an audio animatronic simulation. And he gave a great series of portions of speeches. Today, I still remember what that robot said many years ago, as he said, "The world never had a good definition of the word liberty." His speech went on discussing how liberty and compassion to others could be viewed in different ways. As a lover of science, I once heard what Albert Einstein said about compassion and liberty. A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feeling, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion to his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Albert Einstein. Einstein summarizes liberating ourselves from ourselves by widening the circle of compassion into a plan of action, embracing each other and Mother Earth, embracing what does it exactly mean for us in Mother Earth, and personally, what compassion means. Well, to do this embracing, our arms and our mind must be first free of not holding or doing anything at the moment so we can reach out and help. Compassion is innately tied to helping, and the process is simple and complex at the same time. Find the divine within us. No longer think of ourselves as separate from the universe, and help the earth and each other as best we can. Well, to do this, of course, involves that plan of action. Are we first taking care of our personal needs and our health so that we can help others? This is first being compassionate to ourselves, such as getting enough sleep, setting aside time for meditation and prayer and physical exercise. But I must caution you, exercise within reason. If you do so much exercise you can't move your arms because you're too sore, well, it's really hard to embrace anything. If our basic needs are not met, we can't really share more compassion to another. It's hard to be compassionate when you're freezing cold, hungry, with no roof over your head, but even so, homeless people we might pass by on the streets and vacant lots are doing what they can to help each other build a temporary shelter in the rain and freezing cold. So, can we share compassion even if our own needs are not met at the moment? Of course. Imagine yourself freezing a foxhole under fire, then being wounded, but helping to tend someone more wounded than yourself. It can and is being done by people who suffer or are disadvantaged in some way, who find compassion to help someone else. It's a major spiritual step forward. The Dalai Lama, escaping from Tibet when it invaded China, shared compassion in a way beyond what most exiled people might do. When he compassionately forgave the Chinese soldiers and their government when they took over his homeland in Tibet and dismantled many of its monasteries. Here is a man that lost country, many countrymen, and everything he possessed, yet he showed compassion and forgave the invaders. Forgiveness and compassion are actually companions walking hand in hand. He wrote, "When we are motivated by compassion and wisdom, the result of our actions benefit everyone, not just our individual selves or for immediate convenience. When we are able to recognize and forgive ignorant actions of the past, we gain strength to constructively solve the problems of the present." Compassion motivates us to take a step beyond ourselves. Ultimately, there's a paradox here. Well, I'm helping somebody else, it means I'm doing something for myself. But if I help myself, that means it's just for me. But if I'm helping another, I'm innately and ultimately helping myself. I'm helping create a better world. The compassion is solved. The paradox is solved. Because compassion is deep-seated within ourselves, waiting to bloom and flower into fruition. All we need to do is open our hearts to it. Action will follow. In fact, it is, as I mentioned at the beginning of my sermon here, one of our Unitarian 7 principles: justice, equality, and compassion in human relations. A great story of compassion comes to us from the Bible about Jesus turning 2 fishes and 5 loaves into enough food to feed a multitude of 5,000 people. But before I begin, I would like to quote Reverend May Barnhouse, the Unitarian minister for the Unitarian Church of Austin, Texas, who said, "A lot of Unitarians don't know much about the Bible, but the truth is that most Christians don't know it well either and don't understand its stories. It's a common complaint from Christian ministers. In order to preach on a once famous story from the Bible, they have to tell the story and often explain it as well, because many people will be hearing it for the first time. The problem with stories isn't new. When you read the stories Jesus told, you realize that most of his disciples, they didn't understand them either. One of the most common themes in the Christian scriptures is Jesus telling a symbolic or metaphorical story, and his disciples hearing it only literally. Nearly the entire Gospel of John is composed of these examples. The disciples were literalists. He was telling them parables and metaphors, but they didn't get it. So it's risky telling Bible stories. Okay, I'm pagan. I'll risk it. Raise your hand if you want the short synopsis, about 25 seconds of Loaves and Fishes. Okay. Anybody want to hear the whole story? It runs about a minute 35. A couple people. See me after the stories. In the story of the loaves and fishes, Jesus is at the Sea of Galilee, and his disciples come up to him because it's getting late, and he says, "There's a crowd of about 5,000 people. We need to send them off to buy food." And Jesus said, "They're tired and hungry. Let them stay and listen to my teachings." And he says, "Bring forth what you have." He brought forth 5 little fishes, which, by the way, if you're scientifically involved in something like that, those are actually tilapia. That's the 9 fish that are from the Sea of Galilee. So these little fishes, the 2 loaves and the 5 fishes, I'm going to have it backward. It's 5 loaves and 2 fishes, one of the 2. He gives them to the disciples, and then it magically multiplies, feeding everybody. That's the synopsis. 30 seconds, sorry. Our food will be served right after the service today, but for all of you who are hungry and missed breakfast, I try to keep that speech a little short. Well, back to loaves and fishes. A shared item, shared in compassion, whether it be a loaf of bread or a small fish, it multiplies. The act of compassion has ripple effects, just like pebbles being thrown into the middle of a pool of water. The action causes ripples that move outward. In the case of compassion, when the act is done, it creates the ripple effect, just like the multiplying of the loaves and fishes. Your act of compassion to one another can create more acts of compassion as these ripples move outward. The energy goes outward still. By the way, this leads me to a story of comparing various elements that have different faiths talking about compassion, not just the Christian one. In China, the goddess Kuan Yin is the Chinese bodhisattva, or goddess of compassion, mercy, and kindness. She is considered to be a mother goddess and a patron of seamen. Her name, Kuan Yin, is the short form for Quan Shi Yin, which means observing the sounds or cries in the human world. Many pray to this goddess, such as her name states. She is the goddess of compassion and offers compassion to those crying out. She's a powerful symbol of us listening to the cries of others and doing the best we can to comfort them within our power to do so. In fact, a baby's cry has a powerful effect on others. According to a scientific study described in the British magazine The Guardian, scientists have found that our brains are actually hardwired to respond strongly to sound, making it more attractive and attentive to priming our bodies to help out whenever we hear that cry, even if we're not the baby's parents. The sound, quote, the sound of a baby crying captures your attention in a way that few other sounds can do. And few other sounds of environmental existence that you might be exposed to, said Katie Young of the University of Oxford, who led the study, seeing how the brain processes a baby's cries. So something as basic as a baby's cry inspires in us compassion. Well, in most people, I'd say. I've seen a few run the other way when a baby cries. Personal story of compassion in action. We were in a long line at the Dollar Tree over here at 67th Avenue in Peoria the day before Christmas Eve Day, trying to get those last minute items. There was a mother and her daughter with mom in front of us singing to her daughter a bit of a Christmas carol. I told them, thank you, I really enjoyed that. In fact, I just had my choir sing Silent Night in German and English. And she asked me, I've never heard that in German. So I sang briefly a verse of each, and it broke the ice and we began talking. My wife saw that the mother had a special egg cooker in her hand that she was buying and asked where she could find it. Well, both she, the mother, and my wife ran back to the store to find it. They could not find it at all. The mother came back and finished checking out with the egg cooker, and she said, I'm so sorry, that's the last one. Now, I had already paid for the egg cooker thinking my wife could find one. Well, as the mother was leaving, she turned and handed me the egg cooker she bought the very last one in the store and said, Merry Christmas, and gave it to us. She'd already paid for it. This is the power of compassion in action. In fact, the Boy Scouts of America were founded on an act of compassion. Many of you may or may not know that. This is courtesy of the Boy Scouts of America. One day in 1909 in London, England, an American visitor to London, William D. Boyce, he lost his way in the dense fog. He stopped under a street lamp and he tried to figure out where he was. A boy approached him, a British Boy Scout, and asked if he could be of help. Well, you certainly can, said Boyce. He told the boy that he wanted to find a certain business office in the center of the city. I'll take you there, said the Boy Scout. When they got to the destination, Mr. Boyce reached into his pocket to give the boy a tip. But the boy stopped him. No, thank you, sir. I'm a scout. I won't take anything for helping. A scout? And what might that be, asked Boyce. The boy told the American about himself and his brother scouts. Boyce became very interested, and after finishing his errand, the boy remained outside, and he had the boy take him to the British scouting office, and the scout disappeared into the fog. At the office, Boyce met Lord Robert Baden-Powell, the famous British general who had founded the scouting movement in Great Britain. Boyce was so impressed with what he learned that he decided to bring scouting home with him to America. Do a good turn daily is the scout slogan, and is still with us. There's a statue commemorating this wonderful act of compassion by that unknown Boy Scout, dedicated to him, the young boy who helped William Boyce. I have to ask, are there any former scouts with us today? Any former Boy Scouts? Very good. Any Eagles? Any Eagle Scouts? Well, guess what? Any Girl Scouts? Girl Scouts? Any first-class Girl Scouts? Well, Terry, you and I are the Eagles here. Thank you, sir, for your service. And to all the people who are in the Boy and Girl Scouts, compassion is a major part of our tenets of Christmas. And compassion is an element involved in almost every faith, from Christian to Kuan Yin. And I'd like to share with you some other elements of compassion in other faiths. For those that follow the heathen path of faith, Northern Germanic and pre-Christian, such as Asatru, the Norse idea of hospitality is one of their 9 noble virtues of ethical behavior. As described in their faith, hospitality is just more than just opening your door to the guest. It's about treating others with respect, compassion, and being part of the community. For ancestors, hospitality wasn't a question of simply being nice. It was often might be a matter of survival. A traveler might find himself wandering for days without seeing no living soul. And arriving in a new village meant not just food and shelter, but also companionship and safety. Compassion here to the visitor in ancient times meant that one is cared for and protected while under your hospitality. And in typical Viking or Viking fashion, the visitor would in return entertain the host with a tale or story to help pass that long night. The Order of the Bards, Ovates, and Druids is one of the largest druidical groups in England who do much research on reconstructing the ancient druidic elements as best they can to a new modern-day form of druidry. They share a story of the birth of Taliesin that goes all the way back to the ancient Welsh times, the 6th century, and perhaps earlier. Gwion Bach drinks the 3 drops of a potion destined to Ceridwen's son, and this literally makes the goddess Ceridwen into a beast. Gwion escapes, and trying not to be captured by Ceridwen, he takes the shape of various forms of animals, but the goddess is always able to surpass him in various forms, transforming herself into the antagonist and natural hunter for any animal form taken by Gwion himself. When Gwion Bach, now exhausted by fatigue, at last resorts to turning himself into a grain of wheat, the goddess now takes the shape of a black hen and eats Gwion. The goddess is at this moment not at all associated with water, as Jung teaches us, to our unconscious and deep emotions, swallowing the seed that is Gwion Bach, but in reality receives him in her womb, and there she will learn to love him, of the typical love of a mother toward her son. When that moment comes to give birth, the initial hate is transformed into a compassion that will make her decide to set him free, well conscious of her son who will be born, named Taliesin, who will teach the whole world his art of wisdom acquired in drinking those 3 drops from her cauldron. Compassion drove the goddess Ceridwen to change her hatred of Gwion into motherly love, giving birth to him as her son. Well, so far I've shared with you many perspectives from many faiths on compassion, but what about non-religious people? What about those that have no faith, or consider themselves agnostic, or even ones without any religion at all? Well, here's an interesting study that came to us from the University of California, Berkeley. It's entitled, "Highly Religious People Are Less Motivated by Compassion Than Are Non-Believers," according to an article by the University of California, Berkeley. Love thy neighbor is preached by many from this pulpit, but a 2002 from the University of California, Berkeley suggests that the highly religious are less motivated by compassion when helping a stranger than atheists, agnostics, and less religious people. In three experiments, social scientists found that compassion consistently drove less religious people to be more generous. But for highly religious people, however, compassion was unrelated to how generous they were, according to these findings. I myself can cite a recent act of compassion when I was invited to join the Dungeons and Dragons group here at our local area here on a Friday night. I was brand new to the game after many, many years of being away, and they took compassion on me and didn't kill my character the first night, and I want to thank you for taking compassion upon me. It was very special. So compassion takes many forms, not just through religion or non-religion or various pagan and other faiths, but also in everyday life. Well, we've heard from many viewpoints and stories about compassion, and here's my challenge to you. What can you do to personally share compassion with others? Well, I give you now a compassionate call to action. Do something that benefits others and Mother Earth. Plant a tree. Plant a positive affirmation into yourself. Plant a compliment to another person. Plant yourself behind a kitchen counter, serving others. Plant yourself in front of a computer and Google charities needing help in Glendale, and pick one. You can take it from there. Henri de Champagne wrote, "I had a dream where I was suddenly transported to India, and there, seated under a Bodhi tree, were three men smiling and waving at me: the Buddha, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and Desmond Tutu. I asked the Dalai Lama, 'Your Holiness, where can I find compassion and forgiveness?' He smiled, stood up and picked up a fallen leaf from the Bodhi tree on the ground and handed it to me. I said to Desmond Tutu, 'Most Reverend Tutu, how can I find the compassion you shared to bring peace?' He smiled and said, 'First you must find compassion and peace within yourself, then you can share with others.' I went to the Buddha and said to him, 'Bhagavan Buddha, where can I find a teacher like you to show me how to be compassionate, enlightened, and perfect like you?' The Buddha smiled and held up a mirror, showing me my face. It was then that I saw the shape of the leaf in my hand from the Holiness the Dalai Lama. It was in the shape of a heart. The Dalai Lama once said, 'It is the lack of love for ourselves that inhibits our compassion towards others. If we make friends with ourselves, then there is no obstacle to opening our hearts and minds to others.' Blessed be.
Blessed be.